What Star Trek means to me. Star Trek to me, when I was a kid, I used to love watching Star Trek with Spock and Kirk, and seeing the props and the different costumes and makeup. And I was like, oh, cool. And it kind of inspired me a little bit, because it's very creative. I actually, wanted to be making things. I worked on Star Trek from halfway through the first season of Next Generation, all the way through Enterprise, did First Contact, 17, 18 years working on Star Trek. Steve Horch and myself designed the Mark IX tricorder in somewhere about the middle of DS9, I think it was. We made a prototype of it, sent it off with the prop master to Rick Berman, who made a few notes. We changed it, he approved it, and we started making them. The original tricorder for Next Generation was a all resin casting, hollow resin casting, that was actually quite big. And at the time, the batteries for that particular tricorder were a J cell, which is, has some power in it, but that particular tricorder had a tendency to last for about maybe 15 minutes of actual on time. And there were a few incidences where, some actors would get very upset about the tricorder failing while they're in their scene, and would do a touchdown with a few of these tricorders. So subsequently we'd always have to fix them by the next day. My business partner, Steve Horch, and I decided that we were going to take it upon ourselves to redesign the tricorder and try and improve on the electronics. So one of the people we normally would use during DS9 was George Berger. He came back to us actually early by a day with a circuit board, which he did some testing earlier that day, and he said, oh, I'm getting at least 2 hours out of these batteries. So we were ecstatic about that. This is the second rendition of the tricorder that we made for the show, and this is the approved model from Rick Berman. As soon as he gave us the go-ahead, we had 3 days to make 6 of them, which was a feat of magic unto itself. There's more than enough light in here to make everybody happy. There's movement. There's something going on with this tricorder. It's not just a static, a couple lights blinking here and there. This is actually everything you could think of. Lights everywhere are blinking, moving, so it actually has a function to it. That was one of the major things that Rick Berman wanted to make sure that we had, was movement, make it look like it's functioning. At that point, we couldn't put an LCD screen into the piece. We started doing burn tests as we were building these, and we were finding that we actually didn't have an hour or 2 hours worth of burn time on these. We were getting more like 8 hours of burn time with full functionality with all the lights. This is one of the pieces that I'm actually really proud of, because of the fact that it did everything that we wanted it to do in a little tiny box. And it's actually become one of the most popular tricorders besides the original series tricorder. It's one of those portfolio pieces that, almost a once in a lifetime kind of thing. Our tricorder is basically a vacuform body. So what you do is you take the buck and you put it on a vacuformer, and you heat up plastic and you pull it or suck it around the tooling. Once it's cooled down to a point, you pop that mold out, that tooling, and then you trim off the excess plastic. Now, to build a tricorder, you need a pretty specific size, height of vacuum forming. So you take that piece and put it into a jig that we specially made for trimming these parts, and you take it over to the drill press with a cutoff wheel in it. You slowly cut through the plastic with this cutoff wheel, making sure your hands are clear of the blade, and slowly rotate the jig to trim this piece out. After you've finished trimming this piece out, you're going to probably go back and clean off any little fuzzy bits and so on the edges. Once you've finished trimming this piece and make sure it's ready to go, you're going to move on to making the base plates, which are going to insert onto the bottom of the tricorder. That tricorder base plate is laser cut acrylic. So you have an inner ring, an outer ring, and then a door that insets into that outer ring. Those are glued together, except for the door, and then we also press in threaded inserts. So when you're screwing in the screws into the door to close the tricorder, you have a metal on metal thread. Unlike a lot of props, you have a screw and you screw it right into the plastic. Eventually, changing batteries, that thread in plastic will eventually go away because you've overstressed it and it'll fall out. After you've made that part, you're going to take the rings and glue them to your vacuum form part you've trimmed out to the bottom. Once it's glued on, you're going to go back through and secure it with what we call dental acrylic, or a filler, to fill in the little gaps between that door piece and the main body. Once that happens, then we will take and start sanding and blending that door closure onto the main body. Once that happens, we'll prime it after we've taped off the clear areas. We'll prime it out and go back with any spot filler to fill in any holes or sanding marks that we don't really want. Once that filler is dried, we'll sand it again with a finer sandpaper. We will then go through and reprime it. Once we've looked over the piece and approved that all the parts are nice and clean and ready for hero paint, we'll go and spray on a car paint, which is usually either a lacquer or acrylic lacquer. Once that paint is done, it's a final paint on it, we'll disassemble and take off the door off the bottom, and we'll start installing the electronics into the tricorder. Once those electronics are placed, we'll also start placing the graphics over top of those electronics to match up the LEDs that are on the board with the holes in the graphic. Once that happens, the graphics will be permanently attached to the body chassis. We'll permanently attach the electronics on the inside of the chassis. Once that's all set and it looks good, we'll put batteries in it, test it. If it's working properly, we'll close it up and we're done. And you get exactly what you've seen here.